have Amrie, PhD, Repurposing Existing Drugs for Lupus, and update. Thank you.
So I'm here to talk today about a project that's been going on for about 2 years. Wonderful cooperative success of the ALR and the LRI. I like to start out with this cartoon, which a friend of mine who's a graphic artist made. So someone looking at a computer, and it's sort of the essence of what I'm talking about today, and that's finding drugs that have been approved for one disease and see if they'll work for lupus. So scientist is here thinking about a drug that works for cancer to see if it will fight lupus too. So I wanted to introduce myself. I'm a PhD scientist. I've always worked with human cells for my entire life in close collaboration with physicians. So I used to do experiments myself in the laboratory, and now I analyze things by computer. And I've been working with Peter Lipsky and the ALR and the LRI on the drug repositioning effort. Some of you may know it by LRXL stat, and we have a wonderful LinkedIn site. Many of you are participants in it. We have over 1,200 members now. So just briefly, I'm sure all of you know this, is lupus is a really multifaceted disease, and that's very important for what I'm going to talk about today. One drug very rarely is going to fit for all lupus patients. Some patients have severe kidney disease, some patients have skin disease, some patients have problems with their heart or lung. So it's a very important thing that I keep in mind all the time when I'm looking for new drugs to use for lupus patients. One shoe does not fit every person. And I have to keep that in mind, and the goal is to try to find drugs that can be repurposed for all of these various subtypes of lupus as those that may work for everybody. So it's just a very important thing to keep in mind. So as you all know, lupus unfortunately mostly affects women and minorities. We're just talking about African Americans, but also Hispanics and Asian populations. And despite the need for new treatments, as I'm sure you all are very painfully aware, there's only been one new drug approved for lupus in the past 50 years. And that was really the stimulus for a lot of groups, including the ALR and the LRI, to really drive forward this project to try to see if we could find an alternative way to find new drugs. This is a slide from a paper that came out a couple of years ago, but I'll use it just to illustrate a very important point, is that pharma, and even I was shocked as a scientist to actually see the real numbers, pharma usually take over 13 years and almost $2 billion to make a brand new drug. And usually it's only successful about 10% of the time. So there are a lot of reasons for that. Science is difficult. It's hard to predict from working in animal models to human. Most of the time it's the same. Many times it's different. But I think it's very important to keep in mind when we're thinking about this and see the value of alternative ways to try to think about finding new treatments for lupus. So I have a friend who's an artist who's made some of these pictures for me. And I just want to illustrate some of the different steps that we've taken along the way to get to repurposing drugs in lupus. And if many of you are members of the LRXL Stat LinkedIn site, I appreciate your participation and all of your suggestions. I'd love for all of you to link in with me. So it started out trying to find drugs that could be possible candidates to repurpose, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. We've gotten to the point that we've kicked off some trials. STAT, we wanted to do it quickly, SLE treatment acceleration trials. And we now have a functional lupus clinical investigator network called LUCIN that will actually make these trials happen at universities and medical centers and private physicians all over the United States. So we're at a very exciting time. And it's been moving very quickly. When I was here a year ago, I was telling you about the LRXL stat list, but now we actually have some trials going, which is very exciting. So LRXL stat, or lupus drug repositioning, was initiated by the LRI and the ALR to address the very slow pace of development, which I just mentioned, of new SLE therapies. And the focus was laser beam focus on very quickly trying to identify potential drugs that might work for lupus patients. So I just wanted to very briefly, and I didn't even really understand what drug repositioning was when I started, to just go over what does that mean. People use a lot of words, drug repurposing, drug repositioning, just moving it from one disease to another disease, retooling a drug, using the same drug for another purpose, or reprofiling, retasking. It all means the same thing. So what really is repositioning? So in the first step, we were looking for drugs that have been approved by the FDA, meaning that they're already out there. A physician can write a prescription for them at any time, but may be good candidates for lupus patients and could be tested in a safe way. And just some examples that you might be familiar with. Rogaine is now used for hair loss. It was developed for hypertensive. Viagra was developed for blood pressure, used for a much different purpose now. Lyrica, and Requip. So these are all examples of successful repurposing. So we're not trying to do something entirely new. And even when you're thinking about that, most of the drugs that are used in lupus actually really are repurposed drugs, such as mycophenolate, Cytoxan, azathioprine, methotrexate, and rituximab. So this isn't a new concept. So this is a slide I showed before, just to bring home the point. It costs a lot of money to develop drugs in pharma. We want to capitalize on what's out there and try to very rapidly bring some new drug candidates to lupus patients. So how do we do this? So through some of my friends and colleagues, they suggested social media. I'd never done it before, and it's been wildly successful. That's the LinkedIn site. We got suggestions from patients, physicians, researchers, and we looked at them all. We also searched the entire database of all drugs that have been approved by the FDA. With our knowledge of mechanism, of what we know about lupus, we could make some hypotheses of ones that might be nearer top of the list than others. The ALR and the LRI convened a group of experts in a vetting committee to look at all the agents, and we especially looked at things that have been used in mirroring models of lupus that some of the speakers talked about earlier. So just very briefly, the main point to this slide is we did this in a very methodical way, the same for every single drug. There was no emotional bias, no political bias, so that every suggestion was evaluated in exactly the same way. And these are some of the points. How safe are they? Does it make sense? And actually look in the literature and see if anybody had ever looked at it before, either in a mouse or cells that were taken from a patient, or maybe a case report. A physician tried something with the patient, and it may have worked, and he may have published it. So this is the most exciting slide that I want to show you today. And this is our list of high priority candidates that we're looking at repositioning into lupus. One of them I'm going to talk about in a minute, ustekinumab, which got a score of 10. It's a biologic, already approved. It's a drug with Janssen. All the rest of the drugs in red are things that were suggested and evaluated sort of in the first half of the process. The things in purple are drugs that were either approved over the last year, because this is an ongoing process. I'm always looking at new drugs that are approved to see if they'd work for lupus patients, as well as working with companies to see whether they have something in development, some intellectual property that we can work with them to convince them to take it into lupus. So there are lots of fabulous, fabulous candidates, and I'll just tell you briefly about the trials that are going to be happening pretty quickly here. So the highest scoring biologic, so that's a new generation drug. It's a smart bullet. It's an antibody. Usually has very few side effects because it gets one thing and one thing only, and that's what it was made to target. So this was a drug that was made to treat psoriasis. It's owned by Janssen. But the mechanism of action made sense in lupus. The target made sense in lupus. So a group from the ALR and the LRI approached Janssen, sort of had an amazing meeting with them, met with their top scientists and then with other people almost 2 years ago, and talked about planning, let's just do a small trial, see if it works in lupus patients. There was a press release last spring. The investigator meeting actually happened last month, and the first patient will be enrolled momentarily. So this is a great success and the first trial of this drug repositioning effort that's moving forward. Just briefly, two other things that I wanted to mention. This is something that's near and dear to my heart. In Time magazine last year, the mindful revolution. So meditation, mindfulness, our state of mind, our psychology affects our hormones. It affects the neurotransmitters in our brain. It affects our biology. We all know that. As a student, I would run myself down. I would study too much. I would end up getting sick right after exams. We all kind of know this in our heart. And people over the last 5 or 6 years have started to approach this technique from a scientific standpoint as well. And about a year ago, I was out at Stanford doing some meta-analysis, meaning I'm trying to look for genes that I can target with the drug. Somebody had a lot of data from mindfulness. I collected 2 other studies, and I compared the genes that changed either with yoga or curtain kriya meditation or with some other forms of vipassana meditation. Lo and behold, some of the genes that are abnormally up or down in lupus patients actually change in the opposite direction with meditation and mindfulness techniques. So this is being seriously considered. It's going to be developed in close concert with patient focus groups to make sure that the approach is something that people can incorporate in their daily lives. The curtain kriya method was developed at UCLA. It's a 12-minute meditation. You can find it right now on YouTube. You know, sometimes we all put things off, but I think we can all find 12 minutes in the day to try to help make us feel better. And the goal is to get a prolonged benefit in well-being, but also in disease activity. We wouldn't be looking at this seriously if there wasn't evidence that meditation and mindfulness actually affected disease activity. So the ALR and the LRI had an expert meeting last year, and there's hope that a trial will begin in 2016. Those are the 2 big trials I wanted to talk about, and then briefly touch upon another very important aspect of this whole project, which is the involvement of patients like you. People are calling this many different names, but the simple name is just a lupus patient network. It's a program that's based on one that Peter Lipsky developed in rheumatoid arthritis. It has over a 20-year track record. There are patient educators in the network for rheumatoid arthritis all over the world today. And the idea is to take the lessons learned from that network and to utilize that in lupus, and to do this in partnership with the trials that will be going on with lupus drug repositioning. The idea is to have patient volunteers from every site, to vet them, have them recommended by their peers, go through an evaluation process, participate in formal training about the disease, how to recognize the disease, how to teach other patients to recognize the disease and all of the symptoms, and to interact with patients about lupus and participate in clinical trials and provide support. So you'll hear much more about that over the next 3 or 4 months, but I just wanted to plant that idea in your mind. So to wrap up, I just want to emphasize again something I've learned, the role of social media. So we have a great LinkedIn site for the Lupus Drug Repurposing Initiative. I hope you all go there. That's the website. You can just put in LRXL stat into Google. It will come up. I have cards. I'm happy to give them to you afterwards. We have over 1,200 members. And the most exciting thing is it's generated over 101 different drug suggestions. 16 of those came from patients, and we've looked at every single one of them. So I hope to see you on that site. So in conclusion, the lupus drug repositioning effort is ongoing. It's been very successful. We actually have some trials going, and it really looks like it may accelerate the development of new treatments for lupus. So I'd like to thank all who provided ideas, suggestions, and critiques. This is a rolling process. I depend upon all of you to interact, help us make this better and better. To the ALR and the LRI to have the vision to do this, the continued support and the cooperation to make it happen. Peter Lipsky, who's been a crucial partner in this. Matt Riles, who now is a graduate student at Johns Hopkins, but helped me go through all of the papers personally in the beginning and do all the scoring. So I live in Charlottesville, Virginia now. I'm a Wahoo. I have my bachelor's and master's degrees from there. I got my PhD at UT Southwestern. But I love this quote from Thomas Jefferson, and I think it's applicable to all of us. I like the dreams of the future better than the history of the past. Thank you very much.